My name is Joe Sundling, and this is my AP research presentation on individual versus team athletes and their motivation towards academic and athletics. So to start off, I'm going to define a few key terms, the first of which is intrinsic motivation, which is motivation driven by internal desires or behaviors that are satisfying to the individual. And extrinsic motivation is motivation driven by external rewards that are desired by the individual. And then finally, self-efficacy. This is the ability in oneself, or the belief in oneself to accomplish a particular task. Now, for some background on this, research, Levine, Etchison, and Oppenheimer back in 2014 conducted a large-scale study across a multitude of high schools, looking into societal expectations for student athletes to underperform in school and overperform in sports, and thus created a stigma for them, for student athletes, and basically caused them to underperform in school. And then in 2015, Kumar conducted a survey involving individual and team athletes and their motivation towards physical exercise. And this was found using older methodology. So this leads me to a research gap where I can look into adolescents and their motivation towards career or academic motivation and sport or athletic motivation, and compare it between team and individual sports, like Kumar did. And this directly ties into my research question, which is, how does participation in individual sports such as wrestling in comparison to team sports such as basketball serve as a contributing factor to academic success or academic achievement, or a hindrance to the educational morals of the school, where athletes are focusing more on sports rather than their schoolwork. So in order to research this, I redesigned a study done by Dr. Joy Gaston-Gales of North Carolina State University, and basically went through each of her questions and reworded them to better match high school ideology and terminology rather than collegiate or professional athletes. And in order to test this, I needed a population, so I grabbed 14 of the varsity men's basketball players and 14 varsity wrestlers, all of which were male, due to the findings done by from the study done by Pluar back in 2019. They actually found that there were some key differences in motivation between the two genders, so I wanted to keep all of my population one gender in order to maintain the same level of motivation that Pluar said was there. And then this is kind of the same reason why age, race, and grade were not observed. These were all factors that could have had an impact, but something that I didn't necessarily want to look into. And there wasn't a lot of information previously on this, so probably something that could be looked into in the future, but not by me for this research project. So in order to conduct this, I had to first get consent from each of the 28 respondents to use their responses, and then gave each of these individuals a 30-question survey to fill out and answer to the best of their ability or their perceived ability, and basically broke down their responses or each of the questions into 3 different sub-skills to code them. And the first of which I labeled student athletic motivation. This sub-skill demonstrated the student athletes' motivation towards their sport and sport-related activities. The second of which, career athletic motivation. This was a sub-skill focusing on the future, so careers in the sport field and or achieving financial compensation at the collegiate level. I would consider that getting paid, so that would be a career. And then academic motivation, that was the final subscale. This is solely focusing on the academic related tasks that the student athlete carries out, and all the understanding that comes along with it. And all these questions were answered on the 6-point scale you see here. It is a Likert scale, so it ranges from strongly disagree to strongly agree, while avoiding intermediary neutral responses that wouldn't really help my findings in the end. So how I broke this down, I said the middle of the scale, the 3s and the 4s represented less confidence and less motivation just due to the wording alone. Slightly disagree, slightly agree. That just shows that you aren't as sure in yourself for how you're answering the questions and what you're representing yourself as. So the ends of the scales I said represented more confidence and motivation due to their wording being strongly disagree, strongly agree, agree, and disagree. This shows that you are more sure in yourself and you have more confidence and thus more motivation for each of these questions. And so I broke down each of the responses based on the team they were on and the sub-skills that each question represented. And overall, I found that wrestlers were much more intrinsically motivated, answering on the ends of the scales, while as the basketball players, the team athletes, were more extrinsically motivated, focusing more on the middle of the subscale, the 3s and the 4s, which we can see in this pie chart. Out of all the 420 responses from all 14 athletes and all 30 questions, over 75% of the responses fell in the 3s and the 4s, and so that demonstrates clearly that they are more extrinsically motivated compared to the individual athletes, who, as you can see here, there are a lot more responses in the 5s, the 6s, the 1s, and the 2s, and not nearly as many in the 3s and the 4s. So that just shows that they are answering on the ends of the subscales and therefore have much more intrinsic motivation. So this is obviously agreeing with what was previously found by Kumar, who used a lot more dated methodology, and I thought there were a few limitations that could have possibly led to this being true. The first confounding variable that I thought could have played a role was that the wrestlers were mostly seniors, so therefore they have all of their athletic and academic high school careers under their belt. They know what to expect in the future and what they've done thus far. They're probably confident in how they've performed and what they've been able to do. So therefore they're going to answer, from what I can tell, more intrinsically, and this kind of is shown in their responses. The second confounding variable that I thought could have played an impact was multi-sport athletes. So let's say there was an individual wrestler who was answering kind of based on the mindset of maybe a football player because they played football earlier this year, or perhaps a basketball player answering as a tennis player, just switching their kind of perspectives and answering vice versa. And so that could have thrown off some of the responses, but not something to totally count on for being a limitation. So, and then finally, the level of classes that the athletes were choosing, honors, AP, or IB, none of this was taken into account. So maybe if I did, the amount of time spent on academics could have been more justifiable. If they had more of these advanced level classes, they would probably be more motivated towards academics versus athletics. And so overall, some of the goals that I ended up achieving, wrestlers I found to be more confident and more motivated intrinsically answering again, like I said, on the ends of the subscales, or on the ends of the scale, and then basketball players tended to be more extrinsically motivated, answering in the middle, and that is probably because they are focused more on the team, the effort as a team, not necessarily the effort at the individual level, and being the like top dog, the number one guy on the team or whatever. So this kind of displays that, or my findings displayed that students did not take academic motivation and disregard it for their sport or student athletic motivation. So overall, I thought the athletes balanced their two motivations very well, and no team kind of out sported their academics. So if there are any questions, please feel free to ask them.
What was one obstacle or challenge you encountered while performing the research, and how did you address it?
So starting off my research, I was very lost in the direction to start in because there's such a broad range of topics that you can choose from. It was hard for me to think of a topic that I specifically wanted to look into that I thought would be accomplishable by a high school student. So I wanted to look into something a lot bigger, like global warming, but the topics that surrounded that haven't been explored were just something that a high school student could not commit to.
Which of the various perspectives you explored was the most difficult for you to incorporate into your research inquiry, and why?
The most difficult perspective, I'd say, enjoy Dr. Gaston or Dr. Joy's survey. She, after going back and looking at it, she found that there was indeed a career athletic subscale, which I mentioned earlier, and this was something that I couldn't really think of how to implement into a high school like terminology. So changing her questions involving, looking into the future, becoming professional athletes, or going into careers involving sports, that was something I had trouble changing for high school athletes, but I think I did a decent job at changing the survey questions for these, for that subscale in particular, to best match high school thought process.
Nice. Joe, think about the initial curiosities that led to your inquiry. What other areas of inquiry might that same curiosity lead to?
Well, initially, when I came up with this topic, I was in class and I heard a lot of talk about student athletes and their balance between, lifestyles, and that kind of got me thinking, like, there's a lot of different sports, and each sport kind of has a different routine, how they go about things. And so one in particular that stuck out to me was wrestlers and their routine, and their influx of weight throughout the season, and the things they do in order to get that to change. That was something that definitely sparked my interest right off the bat, and how the influx of weight could have affected their academic performance. But that was something that was a bit too sensitive for high school students, asking them about their weight, and just something that would have been hard for me to conduct without a lot of consent. So